Part 79. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 781. The carriage has a brake, commonly known as a manual brake, which is right next to the coachman. The principle is similar to the handbrake of a car. Avita tightened the reins with one hand and lifted the brake handle with the other hand. The four horses and the carriage stopped in place with a squeak. This made a loud noise, which immediately woke up several people in the carriage. "What's wrong? Are we there yet?" Several people leaned over the window and looked forward. There was still a forest around them, but the trees were much less than at the beginning. There were more rocks in sight, but no buildings were seen, let alone the legendary Abbey Castle, which was several stories high. However, Isis in front kept barking in one direction. "What happened?" Su Ming knocked on the partition in front of him. Avita turned around and shook his head at the people inside. "Everyone stay in the car and don't come out." After saying that, he picked up Isis's neck and threw it into the car through the gap in the partition. Then he raised the double-barreled shotgun on the shaft, loaded the ammunition skillfully, and aimed the gun at the woods in front. "It looks like he might be in danger." Woof woof woof, Isis was very unwilling. He stood up in the car and wanted to get out to fight the enemy with his master. Unfortunately, he was too small to reach the partition above, so he could only scratch the car and make it creak. The biggest danger in the forest is wild beasts. Those who can make people use shotguns are not good people. Labrador is one of the traditional hunting dogs, but unfortunately Isis is too small to help. "Don't be afraid, it's normal to have animals in the mountains." Zhao Yun smiled and comforted the three women in the car, but he quietly pulled the door handle to confirm that the doors on both sides were indeed closed and locked. "I'm not afraid, with my big brother here, he can defeat even dinosaurs." Cheng Cheng was really bold and confident in Su Ming's ability to tame animals. "Cheng Cheng is the smartest." Su Ming touched Chinching's head, then patted Nangong Yan's back of the hand, indicating that it was okay. A stream of mental power went over, slightly calming Isis's restless mood, and turned over to look out from the partition. Ah! A wolf howled from afar in the forest. It turned out to be a wild wolf. Although Avita still held the gun, his tone was much more relaxed. "There are many wild wolves in the mountains. Winter is coming, and the wolves will venture out of their territory to find food. Don't worry, unless it is a large group of wolves, they will not threaten us. Instead, they will take a detour when they see us. Haha, maybe we don't even need a hunting rifle. These four horses are not easy to mess with. Horses that have been truly trained and can be used for racing and pulling carts, especially horses that pull carts in the mountains, are definitely not the same as horses used for taking pictures in the zoo. They are tough and strong, and will instinctively fight back when they encounter wild wolf attacks. It is not good for a horse to be bitten by a wolf, but it may not die. On the contrary, it is different. A small wild wolf can be kicked away by a horse, either dead or disabled. In this way, the people in the carriage were not so nervous. Instead, they looked out with a curious attitude and some excitement. Su Ming secretly separated another spiritual power, transformed it into a soul-attaching ability, and rushed to the sky. The Saker falcon had its wings pecked by the little ibis during the duel and couldn't follow, but the little ibis had somehow mastered a very good flying skill. It might not be as good as the Saker falcon, but it managed to fly thousands of miles to Romania and was now in the sky. Su Ming's brow slightly frowned as he let out a little bit of his mental power. It was strange that his mental power seemed to have encountered some invisible obstacle, and it was difficult to spread out in the air. The range and effect that could be covered were much worse than before. Under normal circumstances, spreading mental power was like a fish entering the water. As long as Su Ming had enough mental power in his body, he could smoothly expand to the surroundings. But now it felt like he had entered a quagmire, which was very strenuous. He barely contacted the little ibis, and used his soul-attaching ability to observe the area below through the little ibis's vision, but the signal fed back was vague, and he couldn't see what was in the distant forest. He only had a rough outline of the forest. Huh? What's going on? Su Ming has never encountered such a situation since his debut. If mental power is radio waves, then there seems to be a magnetic field here that can infect radio waves? This doubt did not last long, and no answer was found. There was a rustling sound of footsteps stepping on fallen leaves in the woods in front. A wolf about the same size as an ordinary big yellow dog appeared in everyone's sight. Wolves and dogs look similar, but the difference can be seen at a glance. The wolf's fur is rougher and its eyes are unusually cold. Dogs will never have this kind of eyes. Even the eyes of mad dogs are different from those of wolves. The former is violent and the latter is cold. As soon as this wolf appeared, it caused a cry of surprise in the carriage. Seeing a wolf in a zoo and seeing a wolf in the real wild are completely two different feelings. What a thin wolf, not majestic at all. Chang Cheng pursed his lips in disappointment. The distance between the two sides was not far. From the carriage, he could see that the wolf's stomach was flat, and it seemed that he had not eaten for a long time. Avito lowered the muzzle of the gun a little. A wolf that was not yet an adult posed little danger. Ah! A burst of rapid wolf howls, followed by 4 larger gray wolves. Avito looked serious and immediately raised the muzzle of the gun again, aiming at the largest wild wolf and pulling the trigger. There were 5 wolves in total, which was already a small wolf pack. In the case of hunger, they would definitely dare to take risks. Experienced hunters would definitely kill the strongest one in the first place in this situation, to shock the tiger, oh no, to shock the wolf. As long as they could knock down the opponent's initial crazy momentum, the remaining wolves would leave on their own. Su Ming was also prepared. Even if his mental power was suppressed to a certain extent, it was not a problem to deal with a few wild wolves. Unexpectedly, before Avito could pull the trigger, a large group of wolves rushed out of the forest behind him. At a glance, they could not count the number. There were probably 20 or 30 wolves, rushing towards the carriage frantically. God, Avito screamed. How could there be so many wolves? He was very quick to react. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, he quickly untied the 4 horses pulling the carriage. He held the shaft with one hand, used it as a fulcrum, swung his body in the air, and jumped to the door of the carriage. He knocked hard on the window, opened the door. Su Ming quickly opened the door, and Avito crouched in with a gun, then closed the door with his backhand, and stuck the muzzle of the gun out from the gap of the baffle, aiming the black muzzle at the wolves. In just a few seconds, the wolves had already rushed to the front of the carriage. The nearest wolves were only 2 meters away from the horses pulling the carriage. The 4 horses were terrified and ran away. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 782. Damn it, why is there such a large wolf pack? Avito didn't need to explain much, everyone had the same question in mind. It is true that this is a mountainous area, and it is normal to have a few wolves in the mountains, but quantitative change leads to qualitative change. There are at least 20 or 30 wild wolves in front of us. Animals have their own range of activities and spheres of influence. Under normal circumstances, it is normal for such a large group of wolves to have a range of dozens of kilometers. If there are a large number of wolves in the mountains, Avito, who lives at the foot of the mountain, cannot be unaware of it. This place is not deep into the mountains, and the wolves will not settle nearby. Moreover, wolves usually hunt at night. Although there is fog in the forest, it is now a serious afternoon, and the sun is still high in the sky. It is incredible to meet a wolf pack. There is no time to think about anything. The wolf pack has rushed to the front, and several horses are scared and run away. Horses are easily frightened animals. They may not lose to wolves in a single fight, but facing a wolf pack is a completely different concept. Even if there are 4 tigers at this time, they will not be able to get away with dozens of wolves. These horses were raised by the villagers themselves. Avita couldn't bear to watch the wolves go hunting, so he aimed at the horse in the front and was about to shoot. Unexpectedly, facing the food in their mouths, the wolves simply ignored it and ignored the frightened horses that ran away. They rushed to the front of the car and naturally separated, and continued to run forward along both sides of the car. They didn't hunt horses, nor did they harass the humans in the car. They ran forward desperately. One horse ran in the wrong direction out of fear, and just plunged into the oncoming wolf pack. It was so scared that it turned around and cried in pain. The wolves seemed to have seen nothing, and their speed did not slow down at all. They brushed past the horses and ran into the woods. No. They are not hunting. Su Ming suddenly realized that these wild wolves were not hunters at all, they were running away. As an old mountain man and hunter, Avila also realized this. What is puzzling is, in the mountains, what kind of animal can make a large group of wild wolves flee? Could it be a bear? But this big guy is not a social animal, and a bear that lives in a family unit cannot pose such a big threat. Lions, tigers. I have never heard of the existence of lions and tigers in the Carpathian Mountains. Besides, tigers are not social animals. Everyone be careful, it might be a wild boar. Avita showed a rare nervous expression, and beads of sweat slid down his cheeks. It seems that there is no other possibility, only a group of wild boars can scare away a group of wild wolves. He would rather be a lion or tiger than a wild boar. This kind of guy with armor and infinite strength has a violent temper and will crush everything in front of him. The carriage may be able to stop wild wolves or even tigers, but it will definitely not be able to withstand the impact of a large wild boar weighing hundreds of pounds. Even a double-barreled shotgun does not have much killing power against wild boars. Judging from this momentum, there must be more than one wild boar chasing behind. Damn it, why have I never heard of a herd of wild boars in the mountains? Avita felt like he had become an outsider, and many common senses were overturned. Su Meng clenched his fists, smiled fiercely, and his joints made a crisp sound. It didn't matter. He could deal with a wild boar, but he couldn't do anything with a group of big wild boars. The scene in Suntown when Su Meng and his second senior brother fought evenly and were trampled on by a group of wild boars like a train was still vivid in his mind. Cheng Cheng suddenly grabbed Su Meng. "Big brother, let these wild wolves help us to deal with the wild boars together." It's said that the reaction of a group of adults is not as good as that of a child. The child has a wild imagination. She only knows that Su Ming can tame animals, and the enemy is very powerful. Naturally, she thought of letting Su Ming leave these wild wolves and cooperate to fight the enemy. Although the Chinese in the carriage were not sure that Su Ming could do it, they still cast a hopeful look. After all, they had seen Su Ming's methods of dealing with wild beasts more than once. When it comes to taming wild beasts, there is probably no one else but Su Ming. Among Su Ming's fans, some even believe that Su Ming may be born with the ability to get along with animals. A large group of wild wolves is not easy to mess with. With 20 or 30 wolves helping on the side, plus a few people and a gun, the chances of winning are much greater. The law of mutual generation and mutual restraint in the animal world is very wonderful. A few wild boars can scare away a large group of wolves, but if the wolf pack can be organized, it is also an expert in hunting wild boars. What? How can wild wolves listen to people? Don't take risks. Before Avita finished speaking, Su Ming had already opened the door of the carriage and rushed out. Although his mental power was affected, it was not completely ineffective. The moment he rushed out, his mental power was spread out like a net, covering the 7 or 8 big gray wolves running past him. Several wolves immediately felt a very fearful emotion, as if they were frightened by the guys behind them. Fortunately, it was still obedient and could be controlled by mental power. It was controlled instantly, but he still had to pretend. After possessing mental power, in order to prevent people from being overly suspicious, Su Ming studied various formal and unconventional methods of taming animals, and wrote and directed a set of animal taming language and movements by himself, which were full of emotion and lifelike. Every time he tamed animals in public, he would do it again as a cover. Several big gray wolves slowed down their pace and stopped not far away, staring at Su Ming vigilantly and curiously. After he danced with his hands and feet like a convulsion, they cautiously approached Su Ming. Su Ming climbed back into the carriage on tiptoe, pulled out several large pieces of beef jerky and threw them out of the window. The big bad wolf bit the beef jerky, some of them lay down and hid under the carriage, and some jumped onto the roof, staring at the woods in the direction they came from. Everyone in the carriage was dumbfounded. Nangongyan whispered in Su Ming's ear, "How did you do it?" Avaitu was even more shocked, with a big mouth, staring at Su Ming like he saw a ghost. "Ha ha ha, as long as Big Brother is here, there is no need to be afraid of any monsters." Only Cheng Cheng raised her little face, complacent, with an expression of "I knew I didn't need to worry." Zhao Yun laughed, "The little girl is quite brave." Shh. Su Ming made a gesture, indicating that everyone should not make a sound. Looking forward from the gap in the partition, there was a rustling in the woods in the distance, and the grass and trees shook for a while, as if something was approaching. After a low wail, a bloody wolf crawled out of the forest. It was crawling, not crawling. The wolf seemed to have been drained of strength. Its belly was pressed against the ground, and its limbs were weak. It crawled out of the woods little by little, leaving a long trail of blood behind it. Su Ming was about to use his mental power to save the unlucky guy, when he suddenly heard the sound of flapping wings. A black mass of strange creatures flew out from the forest at low altitude. One of them spread its wings and wrapped around the unlucky wolf crawling on the ground. It opened its bloody mouth and bit the wolf's head fiercely. A clear click could be heard from a distance. The unlucky wolf couldn't even scream and died instantly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 783. Vampire. Blood-sucking bat. Several exclamations sounded in the carriage at the same time. The one called vampire is a Weitu, the one called vampire bat is Cheng Cheng and a few Chinese people. The creature that killed the wild wolf in one bite looked so familiar. It had a small head like a fox, large thin wings like a kite, a mouth full of jagged fangs, and small red eyes. Isn't it exactly what Su Ming found in the mountains last time? That mutated fox bat that sucks blood. There are still quite a few of them hanging upside down in trees all day long in the magic paradise at the back of the zoo, scaring tourists with red eyes. The only difference is that the vampire bats in the zoo eat beef, sheep, and pig offal provided by a meat factory. The number of vampire bats in front of me was not that large, only about a dozen. After the unlucky wolf was killed, the remaining flying foxes swarmed up and pounced on the wolf's corpse to bite wildly. Not only do they suck blood, they also eat meat. Do you know this kind of animal? Su Ming asked of Aitu. This kind of flying fox was mutated during evolution and should be very rare. A group of domestic scientists are still studying it. Listening to Avaitu's tone, although a little frightened, it seems not unfamiliar. Avaitu nodded, a bat unique to the Carpathian Mountains. It likes to suck blood and eat meat. It occasionally comes to the foot of the mountain to harass the cattle and sheep raised by humans. We locals all know this, and they often scare children not to be alone. Run around in the mountains, otherwise you will be captured by vampires. Speaking of children, Avaitu's expression dimmed slightly, probably because he thought of his little daughter who had been missing for many years. No wonder the legend of vampires is so popular in Romania, it really has its prototype, Zhao Yun said. Then what should we do now? Nurse Xiao, who saw that the so-called monsters were just flying foxes that she often saw, and she was no longer afraid. She asked Su Ming, "Director, why don't you use your magical power to collect these ones too? Come on. I don't know if it will work. Bats are not very humane." "I'll try my best," Su Ming pretended to be embarrassed. Taming a wild wolf was acceptable, but taming a bat all at once was too much. Shocking. Even though he said this, he still felt confident in his heart. Pushing open the car door, he quietly released his spiritual power, covering the group of vampire bats that were dismembering their corpses. Avito looked at Su Ming with a puzzled expression. "As expected, I can barely understand it after controlling the wolf, but if I can even control the bloodthirsty bat with those few movements and whistles, what is the origin of this young man in front of me? Do you have superpowers? Are they the legendary 12 paladins of the British royal family? Or a mysterious figure from the Holy See? Isn't this too fantastic?" The moment they made contact, Su Ming was truly shocked. The mental power that has always been invincible for animals is invested in these local mutated flying foxes in Romania, and it is like sinking into the sea, with no reaction at all. "I'm so hummed, it's useless." At this moment, Su Ming's mind buzzed and went completely blank. "My whole body was cold, my hands and feet were weak, and I was breaking out in cold sweat." Over the past year or so, all his achievements have been based on the simplest foundation: he has animal friends and can communicate with animals and control them. Without these, no matter how talented, smart, and capable he is, it will be difficult to achieve much in today's class-solidified world. In 1 year, at best, he has become a relatively valued grassroots employee in a large enterprise, a white-collar worker who seems to have a bright future. Fear crept into my heart, not because of a few vampire bats, but because of the fear of the future. Some things may be left there and never be used in a lifetime, but for the person involved, they are a strong source of self-confidence and support. For example, if an ordinary office worker has millions of spare cash on hand in the bank, he may never use it and leave the last cent to his son. However, with this money as a cushion, he will not worry about gains and losses at work. On the contrary, he is like a fish in water, seeing everything clearly. For example, if a businessman has a strong backer, he may never ask him for anything in his life, but when he encounters difficulties, he will feel confident and will not panic. As long as he has animal friends, even if everything fails now, he can start over. No matter how many people he offends, he can still live a better life than most people. But once we lose our animal friends, they will become water without a source and trees without roots. At this moment, he even had a feeling that everything before seemed to be a dream. Could it be that now that I have woken up from the dream, I actually have nothing? Everything happened in a flash of lightning. The people in the carriage saw Su Ming get out of the car quietly, and suddenly froze on the spot. His face turned pale for a moment, and his whole body was even trembling slightly. "What's wrong with you?" Nangong Yan's nervous voice came to his ears, and his palms felt slightly warm, and Su Ming was suddenly brought back to reality. "Don't take risks, come back quickly." Nangong Yan suddenly broke out in a cold sweat, because when she took Su Ming's hand, she found that Su Ming's palm was cold. What he saw when he turned around was Nangong's concerned face, a carriage, and several familiar people and a foreigner sitting in the carriage. Hoo ho ho. Fortunately, everything is real, not a dream. Su Ming swallowed and shook his head vigorously to pull himself back from the terrifying thoughts he suddenly fell into. It's okay, I was blown by the cold wind." Su Ming patted the back of Nangong's hand with his back hand, took a deep breath and used his animal friends again. The familiar spiritual power was still flowing in his body and did not leave him. Although for unknown reasons, it was still a little stagnant after being released, but it did exist. The spiritual power once again enveloped the group of vampire bats and tried to control them. The result was still ineffective. However, this time, Su Ming was no longer as scared as at first, but confirmed several very important things. Animal friends still existed well, and the spiritual power could still communicate with animals. The problem was with those vampire bats. Any animal has a mind and personality, some are violent, some are extreme, and some are docile. But as long as there is a mind, it can communicate, it's just a matter of how difficult it is to control the communication. Some people are easy to talk to, some are difficult to deal with, but these Romanian vampires are like a group of hysterical psychopaths, and it is impossible to communicate at all. Well, no, even if they are psychopaths, Su Ming's current mental power can directly suppress them. These bats don't seem to have complete consciousness, and all their emotions, thoughts, and mental activities are broken fragments. No matter how strong the strength is, no matter how hard the fist is, it is impossible to hurt the air. Of course, shattering space is an exception, and Su Ming's current mental power seems to be far from this level. After 2 attempts, the vampire bats that were dismembering the body were finally alarmed. Fluttering, more than a dozen large bats with a wingspan of more than 1 meter slowly flew up, turned their heads together, and stared at Su Ming with blood-red eyes. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 784. After the second mental control failed, Su Ming knew that it was impossible to use animal friends to deal with these foreign vampires. Su Ming had no chance, and the other party seemed unwilling to let him go. Mental patients, or manic mental patients, have a typical characteristic: they cannot be contaminated. Any contact, even if it is well-intentioned, may cause the other party to become ill. Moreover, in the eyes of these bats, Su Ming, a 2-legged guy, and 4-legged guys like wild wolves are essentially the same. They are all food. Since they are all food, and you take the initiative to provoke us, then we can't be partial to one and pretend that we didn't see it. More than a dozen big bats took off into the air, leaving behind the white bones of the wild wolf corpse, and staring at Su Ming with blood-red eyes. Fluttering, flapping, wings vibrating, opening the bloody mouth full of fangs, making a strange squeaking sound, rushing towards Su Ming. There weren't many bats, but they were quite big. Each one spread its wings and was about the size of a round table. A dozen of them pounced together, making a shocking noise. Hide in, Avito leaned out and tried to pull Su Ming. In a flash, the bats had already pounced in front of him. Su Ming was standing by the door and could get back into the car in a flash. The wooden carriage couldn't stop the wild boar, but these ferocious vampire bats would definitely be helpless against the carriage for a while. However, the 7 or 8 big grey wolves that Su Ming had stopped just now were still lying on the roof or hiding under the car. If Su Ming just left and closed the door, he would have pitted these big grey wolves. He would neither unconditionally and unprincipledly show his love for animals in order to protect them, nor would he deliberately pit animals, not to mention that these big grey wolves stayed to help him. In a flash, the nearest bat had already rushed half a meter away, and Su Ming could clearly see the blood hanging from the gap between its fangs. The bat opened its mouth wide, flapped its arms in the air, and then suddenly wrapped itself forward, just like the big bad wolf, wrapping Su Ming with its wings, and then biting off Su Ming's neck or skull. Ah! Be careful! Get out of the way! Su Ming subconsciously took a step back, but he didn't expect Nangongyan to get out of the car in a hurry and try to pull Su Ming. The big bat's bite was right at Nangong's shoulder. Go to hell! Su Ming dodged the double-barreled shotgun from Avito's hand, put the muzzle against the big bat's head, and pulled the trigger without thinking. Bang! With a muffled sound, the big bat that was so aggressive just now seemed to be pulled by a rope from behind and flew backwards. Most of its head was completely blown off by the shotgun. It knocked over several bats behind it and fell a few meters away. Nangong's face turned pale with fear. Su Ming winked at Su Meng. Su Meng dragged Nangong back into the car, but he jumped out of the car and closed the door with his backhand. He also held a 1-meter-long iron stick in his hand. This thing was similar to prying dry. If the carriage was stuck in the mud, it could be used to borrow force. When camping, it could be used to make fire and barbecue, and it could also be used for self-defense. In short, it had many uses. It was usually placed under the carriage seat and was taken out by Su-meng as a weapon. The remaining vampire bats had no idea what kind of ruthless character they had encountered. The loud noise and blood stimulated their ferocity instead. They flapped their wings and surrounded them viciously. Su-meng's face was ashen. He was not afraid of the bats, but Nangongyan rushed out to pull him. If he had reacted a little slower, Nangongyan would have bitten him. "Damn it, kill them!" he roared and shot with his gun. Bang! A double-barreled rifle is useless against thick-skinned creatures like wild boars, but when the opponent is a bat with a huge body but only a thin layer of flesh wings, the power of the shotgun is immediately doubled. The two oncoming bats were shot into sieves, with countless small holes all over their bodies, twitching on the ground. The double-barreled shotgun was completely shut down after firing 2 bullets. The car window was lowered, and Avita handed out a handful of bullets. Buzz! Just as Su-meng was reloading his ammunition, a strong wind suddenly rose from the ground. Su-meng's iron rod made a sharp whistling sound in the air and hit the back of a bat that wanted to take the opportunity to attack Su-meng. The iron rod was not much thicker than a thumb. When the speed and power reached the extreme, it was like a sharp blade, smashing the bat into 2 pieces. Su-meng flipped his hand and smashed another one. Bang! Bang! The roar of the double-barreled shotgun sounded again, and 3 bats fell to the ground. The 2 of them attacked alternately and covered each other. Su-meng would hit the bats that were close to him with an iron rod, and Su-meng would shoot at the ones that were a little further away, killing them. An almost one-sided fierce battle, or beating and slaughter, began. The woods were bustling with activity. Cheng Cheng and the Labrador Retriever, one with a big head and one with a small head, were lying on the glass. Cheng Cheng excitedly shouted, "Come on," and Isis barked wildly. The wolves that had been hiding under the car all came out, and the 3 wolves on the roof also stood up and barked wildly to help. It didn't take long before all 13 vampire bats were turned over. Some were incomplete, and some were full of holes. Their claws were shaking like a miserable reflex. "I told you to be crazy." Su-meng turned the butt of his gun over and smashed the head of a bat that was still twitching but not dead. Su-meng was much more civilized this time. He held a long iron bar and stabbed the bats on the ground one by one, regardless of whether they were dead or alive. Ah, the 8 big gray wolves barked wildly, eager to try, as if they wanted to eat these enemies. Su-meng sprinkled a stream of mental power to comfort them a little. This kind of bat is a mutant, and it is not known whether it can be eaten. If it is eaten, it will have diarrhea and make the whole car sick. Since he came to the mountains, it is really unreasonable not to bring a few animals with him to protect him. The big gray wolf's combat power is still good, and he plans to take them to the castle to play. "Big brother, you are great," Cheng Cheng was the first to jump out of the car with his hands clapping. The little girl was getting braver and braver. Facing the blood on the ground, she was not afraid at all, but quite excited. Avila took the hunting rifle from Su-meng, wiped the blood stains on the butt with a cloth, and secretly looked at the 2 Orientals. It's different from the Oriental people we imagine. The Oriental people in the legend are kind, but aren't they all weak and timid? These 2 people are braver than the most experienced hunters. No, they can even be said to be violent. Species conflict. For this group of people, the threat of bats is actually far less than that of wolves. Even if Su-meng and Su-meng didn't kill them, Avita could kill more than a dozen vampire bats by hiding in the carriage and firing a gun. It's just that the efficiency is a little lower. It's normal to encounter animal attacks in the mountains, so the group didn't panic too much and soon calmed down. At this time, everyone realized a very serious problem. The horses have run away, what can we rely on to pull the cart? Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 785. Ah. Wu. In the forest, the carriage was moving slowly, and the 4 horses that were pulling the carriage turned into 8 big gray wolves. The big gray wolf probably did this kind of work for the first time in his life. He was not very skilled, but he felt a little strange. He ran and howled strangely, and he seemed very happy. The driver became Su Ming and Cheng Cheng. Strictly speaking, it was Cheng Cheng. Avaitu, an old hunter, old villager, and old guide who had lived at the foot of the mountain for a long time, was sitting in the carriage. He felt a trance. Compared with these Oriental people, especially compared with Mr. Su sitting in front, he was the first outsider to come to the mountain. The mountain was completely the other party's home court and paradise. Apart from helping to point the way, he could not help at all. Alas, people can't refuse to accept old age. Avaitu thought, touching Isis's head. But on second thought, even when he was young, he didn't seem so fierce. Cheng Cheng was quite good at driving animals, and commanding 8 wolves to pull the cart in a very good manner. When she was in Yangchuan City, she went to the zoo quite often. She was a VIP of the zoo, and she didn't need to buy a ticket. No one cared about her when she came. She wandered around by herself. She had ridden all the animals in the back mountain that could carry her. Even the wolf-dog brothers were killed, not to mention wild boars and wolves. Once, she almost wanted to ride a tiger, which scared the administrator half to death. Su Ming leaned back in his chair and used part of his mental power to help Cheng Cheng drive the wolf car. The breeze blew in his face, and he calmed down completely, thinking about what happened just now. He was really scared when his mental power failed for the first time, so he felt desperate about everything for a while. But now he calmed down and thought that it might be because the change came too suddenly, and he was not mentally prepared, and he thought too much about many things. Now that Daowen group has developed to this point, if there is really one day without the help of mental power, it will not collapse as he thought just now. The industries under his name include fishing companies, Dashin wine, entertainment companies, film companies, travel companies, protected areas, restaurants, etc. Except for the film company, which has not yet been able to stand on its own, the other companies have already established themselves in the industry. With the help of spiritual power, the products and businesses of these companies will be unique, even unprecedented, and become miracles in the industry. But if there is no spiritual power, will these companies not be able to operate? Not necessarily. A series of important elements such as talents, facilities, management processes, market positioning, etc. are already in place, and even the reserve funds are very rich. Even if there is no spiritual power at this time, these companies can still operate normally, and at best they will develop more slowly, just like other companies of the same type. As long as there is no major decision-making error, it will never collapse overnight, but it will just develop more slowly, and it may have to give up some industries and focus on other parts. If it really doesn't work, just use your energy to maintain the status quo. And I can't become an ordinary white-collar worker again. The worst result is probably to become an ordinary small and medium-sized entrepreneur, with no worries about food and clothing, and a much better quality of life than most people. The better result may be that after more than 10 or 20 years of hard work, I will own a good listed company and touch the threshold of the real rich circle. Even if I do nothing, I will sell all the current industries at a discount, which is enough for me to take my family and live a carefree life anywhere in the world. With my current reputation in China and my little fame in the world, as long as I don't do stupid things, no one will deliberately embarrass me. What else do I want? Why was I so scared at that time? Sitting in the carriage with the cold wind blowing, Su Ming closed his eyes and thought. Suddenly opened his eyes. I understand that the reason why I am afraid of losing my mental power is not only because I want to do a real career in my lifetime, but also because of another biggest reason. In other words, I made up my mind when I first gained the ability of animal friends. Revenge for my father. The hatred of killing my father is irreconcilable. Neither his mother nor his father's unit knew much about what happened back then. There were only some clues, and it seemed impossible to investigate. With the expansion of financial resources and power this year, Su Ming has been secretly investigating the incident through various channels. Although he did not get much information, he was sure that the murderer of his father was not just a poaching team. There is a big shadow behind this team. Later, he dealt with the Italians in Suntown, met Park Genji in Kinling Mountains, and met the group of Chinese poachers in the back mountain at the beginning. All kinds of signs pointed to the huge organization mentioned by Park Genji, God's Garden. Su Ming was not sure that it was God's Garden that killed his father, but it must be related. In the face of the mysterious and huge God's Garden, ordinary rich people and ordinary forces are not enough. If he did not have superpowers and friends of animals, he might not be able to take revenge in his life and would have to carry this knot for the rest of his life. It is difficult for people who have not had the same experience to understand the psychology of a child whose father was killed. This knot has accompanied him almost from childhood to adulthood. Although he often jokes and jokes, there is always a lingering feeling in his heart when it is late at night. This knot is not resolved. Su Ming feels that no matter how much money he makes or how many emotions he has, he will feel incomplete. Maybe he can live a smooth and even relatively happy life, but this life must have major flaws. Su Ming was afraid that he would not be able to close his eyes when he died. This was the real reason for his fear just now. God's Garden. Su Ming muttered these 4 words secretly. This incident seemed to ring a wake-up call for him. Life can be very long, but some things must be done quickly. At this moment, the phone rang. Unexpectedly, there was still an intermittent signal in the mountain. Looking at the last frame of the flapping signal, Su Ming estimated that if he went deeper, he would probably not be able to receive the signal at all. The caller was Shen Yan. Before leaving, he gave Professor Eisenberg's photo to Shen Yan and asked him to check the people who entered and left the zoo in the past 6 months. Shen Yan used the dumbest and only method. Facial matching technology is very time-consuming for humans, but it is much simpler for computers to do it. The result came out. This Professor Eisenberg had entered and exited the zoo and the back mountain no less than 20 times in the 6 months in China, and each time he would stay in front of the residence of some rare protected animals. On one occasion, the camera captured a detail: Professor Eisenberg touched a finless porpoise with his ring-wearing hand in the aquarium. The finless porpoise, which was usually docile and friendly, did not act like a spoiled child as usual, but ran away as if it had been electrocuted. Well, I see. Su Ming had just finished speaking when the phone rang busy. He looked down and saw that there was no signal at all. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 786. Su Ming looked at his cell phone with no signal and thought that he was lucky. At least he had said everything he needed to say. According to the results obtained by Shen Yan through the comparison of the surveillance video, and the fact that he had previously paid 2 college students to steal the monkey hair, at least 2 things can be confirmed. First, this Professor Eisenberg must be more than just an animal lover. He has been to the zoo more than 20 times in the past 6 months. He must have a purpose. If I am not mistaken, he wants the part of the animals that carry genes. With this preconceived view, it is easy to explain why the porpoise ran away immediately after being touched by him in that video. If I am not mistaken, there is probably a small instrument such as a needle to extract genes in the ring on his hand. Second, the animals he chose are all protected animals in China, and most of them are unique to China. The genetic specimens of these animals are difficult to obtain abroad, and even rare in China. In the past year, Yangchuan Zoo has concentrated a large number of rare protected animals through spending money to introduce and Su Ming's own efforts. That's why Professor Eisenberg chose Yangchuan Zoo. After Su Ming established contact with Yangchuan Medical University, he talked about Professor Eisenberg with the school intentionally or unintentionally, but he didn't hear that he needed samples for genetic research. If it was a legitimate research that required genetic samples, he could use the identity of a visiting professor to get through the school. Big brother, look, are we almost there? Chinchin's words came, interrupting Su Ming's thoughts. The water was gurgling, and the carriage had arrived at the edge of the forest. Not far ahead was a stream with a rather turbulent flow. The origin and end could not be seen from a distance, separating the forest from the opposite mountains. According to the route pointed out by Avitu, follow the stream and go upstream, and you can see the Abic Castle. No hurry, let the wolves rest for half an hour, and then continue on the road. Su Ming rubbed Chinchin's watermelon rind head. Professor Eisenberg's doubts were put aside for now. According to the existing information, he did not necessarily mean to harm the Yangchuan Zoo. It was just that the zoo happened to have the animal genes he needed. Taking some furs would not harm the animals. There were too many secretly conducted trades and studies around the world. Su Ming felt that he did not need to be so nervous and think too much about everything. It was just a matter of further strengthening security after returning home. This time in Romania, in addition to personally going to the Abic Castle to declare sovereignty, Su Ming also had a happy life event to do, so he put these troubles aside for the time being. The overall strength of the 8 wolves was not inferior to that of 4 horses, but the stamina of the wolves was far inferior to that of the horses. After more than an hour of driving, they were also a little tired. The carriage stopped by the stream and loosened the reins of the wolves. The big gray wolves lined up and lowered their heads to lick the water by the stream. A female wolf was lucky enough to catch a big white-bellied fish that was washed to the shore by the current and feasted on it. Everyone got off the carriage. From entering the mountain to now, the carriage has been traveling for almost 3 hours. Although the road is not rugged, it is not a smooth road after all. The comfort of the carriage cannot be compared with that of the car. It is just the opportunity for the wolf to rest and people to get off to breathe. It's so cold. Cheng Cheng took off his sneakers and sat on a big rock by the river. As soon as he put his feet into the stream, he quickly retracted his feet. Oh, beautiful girl, be careful of catching a cold. The streams in the mountains are very wet and cold. Don't compare the stream water with the tap water in the city. Even locals like us will have stomachaches if we drink a few sips of Itu explained kindly. The cold is difficult to explain. If you use a thermometer to measure the temperature of mountain spring water and tap water, the mountain spring water is not much lower than the tap water, and it is far from freezing. But people who often go into the mountains know that they would rather eat ice than drink mountain spring water. From the perspective of some traditional Chinese concepts, because the spring water comes from underground and flows along the stone ground, it is connected to the earth's energy, that is, the yin energy. The scenes in TV dramas where people scoop up a handful of mountain spring water are basically lies. You will have a stomachache on the same day after drinking it. However, if you don't drink mountain spring water in summer, it won't be a big problem to drink mountain spring water in winter. Natural creations have always been wonderful. But the scenery here is indeed excellent. The rushing stream hits the rocks of all sizes, turning into dots of flowers, gathering together again, and rushing down. The wrinkled mountains not far away from the stream have been weathered and eroded for many years. The mountains are round and the faults are obvious, which looks extremely steep. Looking into the distance, there is a faint crystal on the mountain tops far away. It is obviously a glacier covered with snow, which forms a contrasting beauty with the hot springs that can be seen everywhere in the mountains. During the break, the wolves and the Labrador Retriever Isis kept a distance that they both thought was safe. They seemed to dislike each other. As expected of the British royal family's favorite hound for hundreds of years, Isis, who was not yet an adult, did not show any fear in the face of 8 big grey wolves, but was eager to try. Several girls took out their cameras and kept taking pictures. Cheng Cheng turned into a little model and posed everywhere. Under Avita's nervous eyes, this daring little girl even hugged the necks of 2 big grey wolves in one hand and took a photo. The 3 heads were put together. The 2 big grey wolves looked helpless, and Cheng Cheng smiled brightly. Just as they were about to set off, the big grey wolf and Isis suddenly barked at the other side of the river at the same time. A brown bear appeared on the other side with a twisted head. There are many kinds of bears in the Carpathian Mountains. According to statistics, there are no less than 6,000 brown bears alone. Although the appearance of this big brown bear was sudden, it did not surprise people. Instead, there was a sense of expectation and satisfaction of finally seeing a bear. The river was turbulent and the river surface was quite wide. The 2 sides were separated by a river. You looked at me, I looked at you, and neither of them had the idea of killing each other. The brown bear squatted by the river for a long time and finally caught a big fish. He bit the fish and twisted his head contentedly and walked away. After a small episode, we got back on the road. The carriage climbed along the rocky path by the river. Halfway through, we could hear the roar of an airplane in the sky above our heads. It is said that tourists often come to the mountains by helicopter to find wild hot springs and undeveloped skiing spots to play and seek excitement. The wolf car slowly climbed. As the altitude rose, the river around it gradually turned into a canyon. The drop increased, and the sound of water became more and more rumbling. In the evening, not far away, a natural stone bridge several dozen meters long stretched between 2 mountains and crossed the canyon. Opposite, a black castle stood tall. Finally, we arrived at the destination of this trip, Abike Castle. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 787. For those who are used to living in a big city of steel and concrete, it is difficult to imagine what it feels like to face a castle. In Yangchuan City, a commercial house of 100 square meters is the goal of most people. It is enough for a family of 3 to live in daily without feeling cramped. There are hundreds of such houses in a community covering dozens of acres. Each building is divided into more than a dozen square cement grids, and people are crowded together. Even the enviable single-family villas are nothing more than less than an acre of land, with only 10 rooms and an area of 200 to 300 square meters, which can already make people feel unusually spacious. The Abike Castle in front of us, even though it is separated by a natural stone bridge of nearly 100 meters, looks like a behemoth carved out of the mountains, standing between heaven and earth. There are a total of 52 separate rooms, including the Lord's bedroom, large dining room, guest room, weapon room, granary, etc., 2 large viewing terraces, more than 10 small terraces embedded outside the rooms, a small square in the center of the castle that can be used to grow flowers and plants and train soldiers, a separate reservoir, a basement the size of a basketball court, and an ancient but very scientific and complete drainage system, dozens of arrow stacks and defense strongholds. A beacon tower, and a natural hot spring, which together constitute the Abike Castle. The wolf's soft footpad stepped on the black rock bridge silently, and the carriage wheels squeaked and turned, walking along the bridge towards the castle opposite. The stone bridge seemed to be very narrow from a distance, like a line, stretching between 2 mountains. A few dozen meters below was a canyon with turbulent water, and the sound of water flow was faintly heard. There were straight cliffs on both sides, which looked very dangerous from a distance. It was not until the carriage was driving on it that I realized that it was actually quite wide. 3 carriages or 7 or 8 people would not seem crowded at all. It was similar to the widest 4-lane highway in China. As long as you don't seek death, there is no risk of falling or being blown off by the strong wind. Open the carriage, you can see that there are very old stone walls on both sides. Ancient Chinese buildings are gorgeous, exquisite, and beautiful, and satisfying people's living comfort is the first priority. Most of the materials used are wood, which is shockingly valuable. It is said that a main beam in the summer palace costs hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. In ancient Western times, wars were frequent and the economy was underdeveloped. The castles of lords at all levels, including the king, had important military considerations and were the strongest defensive buildings in the territory. Therefore, the materials were mostly stone. Every distance on the stone walls on both sides, there is a lion-like statue, and on the other side is a statue of the Virgin Mary, which is said to represent the family of the castle lord and his religious beliefs. However, because it is too old and Unicorn is a poor princess, she has no money to repair the interior of the castle, let alone the external passage. Most of these statues are missing arms and legs. After getting on the bridge, several people in the car couldn't sit still. They got off the car excitedly and walked. Avituk finally found his sense of existence again and introduced the history of the castle to everyone. It is said that the previous owners of the castle were all the most staunch Catholics. The first owner came directly from the Roman Empire. He was commissioned by the Holy See to lead his knights to overcome difficulties and build the earliest epic castle to resist the attacks of pagans. Over the past few hundred years, the castle has experienced many glorious battles. Even on the stone bridge under your feet, you can find traces of the fierce battles of the year. In Romania, there are many stories about epic castle. The most famous one is to assist the Holy See and send troops to attack Vlad III, the Grand Duke of Wallachia who ruled Romania at that time. Vlad III, Zhao Yun stroked a lame lion statue and asked with interest, "Isn't that Count Dracula?" "Haha, I didn't expect that Orientals are also familiar with our folklore. You are very knowledgeable." Vlad III is the prototype of the most famous vampire Count Dracula in the legend. It is said that he is the king of vampires and can command ordinary vampires. His castle is said to be surrounded by countless bats, floating in the sky all year round. It only appears once every 10 years and only sucks the blood of a virgin at a time. According to legend, when night falls, Dracula will sit in the carriage transformed by bats and come to a beautiful virgin, open the door and extend his hand elegantly. No woman can refuse his invitation. They willingly walk into the carriage and disappear into the night sky. When the woman's body was found the next day, her body was pale but extremely beautiful, and she must have a sweet and satisfied smile on her lips. A bunch of idiotic women Cheng pouted disdainfully. Nurse Xiao Hu subconsciously looked up at the epic castle at the end of the stone bridge. Fortunately, there was nothing around the castle, let alone the so-called bats. Nangongyan suddenly blinked at Su Ming and said, "Do you remember, there was a cartoon when I was a child, what was it called?" "Haha, Count Dracula, a vampire who violated the tradition of his ancestors and refused to suck blood, was actually a big duck." Su Ming also laughed when talking about his childhood experiences. Romania is the hometown of vampire stories. Vampires have even become a culture here, a tourist sign. In addition to Count Dracula, another famous female vampire in history, Countess Bathory, lived in Sayat Castle, not too far from Epic Castle. It is said that Count Bathory was away fighting all year round, and the elder sister had nothing to do, so she captured girls from nearby villages and tortured them for fun. She bled the young girls to death like animals in a slaughterhouse, drank their blood, and bathed in blood, believing that this would maintain her amazing beauty and youth. Blood contains a lot of iron. Long-term consumption of blood can cause gastrointestinal diseases, dark spots on the skin, a large amount of pigmentation, and even iron poisoning. Nurse Xiao Hu analyzed from a professional perspective, if you want good skin, you should take more high-protein foods. This countess is obviously not well educated. If you want to capture them, you should capture young and strong men. Several people looked at her with speechless eyes at the same time. Cheng Cheng asked curiously, why? Is there protein in men's blood? The scene was quite embarrassing. Fortunately, they had arrived at the gate of the castle. A wide iron gate like a floodgate of a reservoir attracted everyone's attention. Avita took out a bunch of keys and unlocked the door with a click. Su Meng and Su Ming helped, one on each side, and pushed the iron door open with force. It's so dark. Looking at the dark passage behind the iron door, the women were a little scared, as if countless vampire bats would pour out of the passage at any time, or a pale vampire in an evening dress would greet everyone at the end of the passage. The group stopped outside the castle gate. Wait a minute. Su Ming suddenly grabbed Nangongyan's hand and said softly. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 788. The castle gate slowly opened, and in the bright moonlight, Abik Castle was completely open to everyone. Hearing Su Ming suddenly ask such a question, everyone's eyes were cast on him. Nangongyan thought Su Ming wanted to scare her at first, but Su Ming's tone was completely different. She suddenly had an idea, as if she thought of something very important. She opened her eyes wide, looking a little unbelievable, and asked in confusion, You won't? Su Ming smiled, but did not answer Nangongyan, but nodded to Avita, who shrugged, As you wish, Mr. New Lord. After speaking, he pressed on the wall. The whole castle suddenly lit up. In the moonlight, Abik Castle in the dark was shining with a fascinating light blue light. The light came out from the windows of every room and every terrace, outlining the outline of the entire castle. In the light blue light, countless small bright spots floated around the castle like fireflies. The entire castle was like a huge diamond, shining brightly in the moonlight, emitting a soft star-like light. Boom! Just when everyone was shocked by this spectacular scene, 3 light groups with tails suddenly rose from the central terrace of the castle and the 2 spires on both sides, turning into gorgeous fireworks in the night sky, illuminating the sky. Under the lights, it was clearly visible that at the end of the wide passage, in the center of the castle's welcoming garden, flowers were blooming, fountains were blooming, and among the flowers, there was a jade-like statue of a real person with a warm body. The statue was wearing a long skirt, like a fairy walking among the flowers. Huh? Sister Nangong, that statue looks exactly like you, Chinchin's surprised voice sounded amid the sound of fireworks. Everyone then noticed that the statue's eyebrows, smiles, and even movements were very similar to Nangongyan, and could even be said to be exactly the same. Even the slightly raised smile at the corner of the mouth was the same as Nangongyan's habitual smile, which was simply subtle and slightly raised. Nangongyan was stunned. This sudden gift was too unexpected. Obviously, all of this was arranged by Su Ming, and it was also the real meaning of the strip. As a woman, she had vaguely guessed what would happen next. She turned her head slightly and saw the familiar face with a gentle smile. Let's get married, Su Ming said. Old Avita didn't know until now that the new owner of the castle had spent so much effort, and the real purpose was to propose marriage. A few days after the castle changed its new owner, Avita actually contacted the new owner, a young gentleman from the east, and then Avita began preparations according to the other party's instructions. He first cleaned and repaired the entire castle in an all-round way. This work alone is a big project. The previous owner, Princess Eugene, was a real pauper. Every year, the castle's repairs were limited to routine inspections of several core areas to ensure that the main components of the castle would not be damaged due to disrepair, such as a corner tower suddenly collapsed. The new owner directly sent a large sum of money. Old Avita first went to the provincial capital to hire hundreds of professionals. On the basis of maintaining the original appearance of the castle was reinforced and repaired in all aspects, making the entire castle almost stronger than when it was first built. Then, almost all the residents of the village were hired, men, women, old and young, to clean every room and every corner of the entire castle spotlessly. This was unimaginable in the past Eugene era. Eugene herself might not come to live in the castle once a year. Even if she came, she would only live in the master bedroom. Just kidding, manual laborers in Europe are very expensive. It costs tens of thousands of dollars to hire someone to clean the entire castle. The matter did not end here. Strictly speaking, it was just the beginning. Next, the water supply, drainage, lighting, and heating systems of the castle were all restarted. In the past, these systems were not used for several years, and most of them were in disrepair for a long time. To put it bluntly, they were broken. This time, the restart was not just a simple repair, and many of them were simply replaced directly. This is another large sum of money. It is still not over yet. The previous process can be regarded as a necessity of life, and the last process is decoration. The lawn was repruned, the terrace in the room was planted with flowers, special fireworks and light sources were arranged. All things were completed within 50 days, which is almost impossible under normal circumstances. But the money they gave was too much. In front of the real US dollars, the European working people who have always been famous for pursuing quality of life are also willing to work hard. The money spent in total is almost more than the total amount invested by Unikin since he became an adult to manage the castle. Old Evita had heard about the wealth of Oriental people, but he didn't expect that when he really met, this wealthy Mr. Su was only in his 20s. Before he set off, he was still thinking, spending so much money to repair the castle, is it for future travel? Or is it used as a private club to entertain important business partners and politicians? But when he saw the young female companion who looked exactly like the statue, he knew Mr. Su's real purpose. It is said that Westerners are romantic, and Easterners are obviously not lacking in romantic genes, but, it's a bit of a waste, nearly $1 million US, just for a sentence now. Su Ming suddenly proposed, and the whole audience was stunned. Only Zhao Yun had guessed a little bit before, and nodded and smiled. Su Meng didn't know what a proposal was, but he also nodded and smiled. Only Cheng Cheng's innocent voice sounded, "Big brother, where is your engagement ring?" Su Ming smiled at Nangong, "This castle is my engagement ring. Everyone present is a witness." Nangong Yan's eyes were slightly sore. In fact, she had been looking forward to this day for a long time. As Su Ming's career grew bigger and his business became busier, the relationship between the two became closer, but she felt that this day seemed to be getting farther and farther away from her. Behind every successful man there must be a woman who silently contributes. However, the world only sees the success of men, and few people can truly understand what this contribution and waiting means. Even after Su Ming met his father and mother, Nangong Yan had a feeling in her heart that Su Ming would not mention marriage in the short term. After dating Su Ming for so long, Nangong Yan had a woman's intuition that Su Ming had something in his heart that he didn't want to tell anyone but had to do. Before he finished this thing, it would be difficult for Su Ming to be truly happy. So she had been waiting silently. When the long-awaited thing suddenly came, she felt that it was not real. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 789. The preparations for the proposal were very complicated, so complicated that even Nangong Yan, who was not involved in it at all, had no prior knowledge, and was the protagonist and slightly absent-minded during the process, could sense that it was definitely not a small project to renovate such a large old castle with a long history to this extent. However, the marriage of the proposal was a bit confusing. Nangong Yan did not say yes or no after Su Ming said let's get married, The two looked at each other for a while, and then Nangongyan took Su Ming's arm, and the two walked into the castle first. There are advantages to being thick-skinned. If it were another woman, when she saw another man proposing to his girlfriend, she would definitely give her boyfriend a lecture, saying things like, "Look at how he is, how you will be in the future." Nurse Xiao, who seemed to have not associated the scene with her and Su Meng at all, and said blankly, "What does this mean? I don't understand." Did he agree or not? Su Meng certainly didn't understand. When it comes to emotional issues, he is the simplest and most direct one among all the people present, and in fact, the most relaxed and simple one. Cheng Cheng held his chin thoughtfully and sighed like an old man. "Maybe Sister Nangong feels pressured." Avita shrugged and spread his hands, as if he didn't understand your Oriental thoughts. If it follows the Western routine, since both parties have feelings, then even if they don't agree, such a big scene has been set up, and then a vigorous friendship cannon should be fired next. Only Zhao Yun smiled and asked Nurse Xiao, who, when proposing, if the woman accepts the diamond ring, it means she agrees, right? Ah. By the way, the director didn't even prepare a diamond ring, but just made some firecrackers and lit some lights. This is too careless, Xiao Hu suddenly realized and said, "No wonder Miss Nangong didn't agree. I wouldn't do it either." Zhao Yun laughed and raised his chin towards the castle. "Isn't this just a big diamond?" "Ah. I don't understand." Nurse Xiao Hu shook her head. Zhao Yun didn't explain, but took Chinchin's little hand and said with a smile, "Dad will take you to the castle. No matter whether it succeeds or not, no one else will disturb Su Ming and Nangongyan's world of two now." So under the leadership of Avaitu, the four of them went to visit the castle. Late at night, in the Lord's bedroom at the highest point of the castle, Nangongyan, wearing a wide robe and barefoot, walked out from behind the curtains that fluttered in the wind, came to the large terrace outside, lay on the edge of the terrace, and looked at the mountains in the distance. The mountain breeze at night was very fresh, with a hint of chill. It was cold at high altitudes. A gust of cold wind blew, and Nangong couldn't help sneezing. "Be careful not to catch a cold." Su Ming came out from behind, took a big blanket and wrapped Nangong in it, hugged him in his arms, like a kitten who had just taken a bath. "Isn't it a pity to spend so much money and only use it once today?" Nangong leaned back slightly and leaned his face diagonally on Su Ming's shoulder. Su Ming laughed, pinched her nose, and said with a smile, "At this time, it's too bad to talk about money instead of romance, right?" Nangong Jiao said with a smile, "Of course we have to talk about money. From today on, this is my castle. I heard that the annual maintenance fee of a castle alone is quite a lot of money. I am not like other princesses who have a lot of inheritance left by their ancestors." "You dare to mention this?" Su Ming slapped her on the buttocks. Nangong thrust forward, turned around, put her hands around Su Ming's neck, pouted and stared at him. "I found that I was fooled by you. You are a big bad guy." "What are you talking about? Others gave diamond rings when proposing, and I gave castles. Am I a bad guy?" Su Ming asked with a smile. "Of course, there was no such castle before. If my sister was unhappy or annoyed with you one day, she could just turn around and leave. Now that I have accepted your castle, I can't run away even if I want to in the future, otherwise I can't even afford the house." Nangongyan pouted and acted coquettishly. "I don't care, Boss Su, you have to give me a raise." Of course, Su Ming was also serious. "That's better. In this case, I will accept the castle with reluctance." Nangongyan let go of Su Ming's neck, stepped on the carpet on the terrace with a pair of bare feet, and walked into the bedroom. Suddenly turned around behind the curtain and smiled charmingly at Su Ming. "Why are you still standing outside? Aren't you cold?" "It's okay, ah." "Oh." Su Ming rushed into the bedroom with a beastly nature. "There is a reason why young people like to sleep in, especially when young men and women are in the same room the night before, they will sleep in the next day. When Su Ming and Nangongyan got up, it was already noon. The warm sunlight shone into the room from the terrace. The two dressed and washed up, and went to the big dining room downstairs. Zhao Yun and the others were already waiting. The castle was good in every way, except that the interior could not get sunlight. Many places were a bit cold, and the big dining room was like this. There were only 2 windows, and the sunlight could not reach all of it. Fortunately, there was a big fireplace, and the fire was lit inside, which was warm. Avaitu was not only a good guide, but also a versatile butler. He prepared a large lunch with bread and barbecue. After everyone had lunch, Cheng Cheng couldn't wait to take everyone to visit the basement. Most girls like flowers and plants, but Cheng Cheng was quite interested in things that boys play with, such as swords and swords. Last night, she found a lot of fun things in the basement. After the group went down, Su Ming was also shocked by the scene in front of him. In the basement, which is slightly larger than a basketball court, there are actually many cold weapons stored. On the wall are many common 2-handed heavy swords, lances, ox-horn long-handed weapons in the Middle Ages, and a beautifully crafted crossbow. This crossbow is even more lethal than a pistol. It is simply a must-kill weapon in the era of cold weapons. Within 20 steps, it can penetrate the plate armor of a heavy knight. The only disadvantage is that the shooting speed is too slow. After shooting an arrow, you need to use a wrench to reload it. There are more than a dozen large boxes in the basement. After opening them, they are all arrows wrapped in oil paper. The basement used to store armaments. In the castle defense battle, bows and arrows are the main weapons. These weapons and arrows are preserved as part of the castle culture. If they are damaged, they will be replaced regularly and included in the annual maintenance expenses of Aitu explained. Su Ming picked up an arrow and took a look. It was well preserved, at least much better than what he saw in the archery hall in China. In the corner of the basement, there are 5 sets of full-body metal armor. It is said that this is what the castle owner and his 4 bravest knights wore when they sent troops to help kill Count Dracula. Dividing line. Super Zoo. Author, Yin Seg Nian Bai. Chapter 790. Not only Cheng Cheng, but also several people present were very interested in these weapons, not to mention Zhao Yun, whose specialty is antiques. The Europeans' ideas are quite strange, and they often guard the treasures in vain. For example, Unikan can hardly afford the maintenance costs of the castle, but he refuses to sell the objects in the castle. Su Ming has seen not just 1 or 2 culturally valuable antiques since yesterday, but almost everywhere in the castle. Just these few full-body armors, if sold, would probably be worth a lot of money. The owners of the castle not only refuse to sell them, but also spent energy to maintain them every year. The concepts are different, they regard these things as culture, not money, Zhao Yun said. Su Ming was playing with a 2-handed heavy sword. This thing was like a small door panel, probably weighing 40 or 50 kilograms. If he swung it on horseback, he didn't need to sharpen it at all, and it would break bones and tendons. He said casually, it means they are not that poor. If they really can't make ends meet, they will sell it. That's right, Zhao Yun smiled and turned to Cheng Cheng and said, be careful, these are real weapons. Cheng Cheng was holding the crossbow, closing one eye and aiming it here and there. Wherever the crossbow arrows were aimed, people there were sweating. Su Ming waved his hand, let's go to the garden outside to play. In addition to leisure, the castle garden's biggest function is to practice martial arts and soldiers. The area is much larger than the basement, and there is a row of bow and arrow targets. Several people excitedly selected bows and arrows, and Su Ming came to the garden carrying a large box of arrows. Swish, 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 a burst of random shooting. Su Ming and Su Meng, one of whom had received formal archery training and the other was extremely strong, were both quite accurate, but Nangongyan and Xiaohu were not. The bows in the basement were hard bows used for war, which were completely different from the 30-40 pound bows in the archery hall. Even Xiao Hu, who was considered strong among women, couldn't pull them full. Cheng Cheng's crossbow fired an arrow, and it went off course, and then he grunted and restringed the crossbow arrow. Su Meng played with the bow and arrow for a few times, and probably felt that there was no challenge. He held the largest two-handed heavy sword in one hand and chopped wildly at the wooden training dummy in the garden. What a brave warrior! Avitu's eyes were wide open. This kind of two-handed heavy sword, even a medieval knight, had to rely on horsepower to perform, but this guy was holding it on the ground like a toy, and he was holding it with two hands. Different races, he is a barbarian. Su Ming laughed. In the Carpathian Mountains, near Hungary, there is also a castle among the mountains. Compared with the Ebik castle, this castle is a circle larger in size, and from the appearance, it looks more modern, and the surrounding transportation is more developed, and there is even a road leading directly to the castle. Obviously, the castle has permanent residents. At the top of the castle, there is actually a well-maintained helipad. At this time, a large helicopter is parked in the circle in the center of the helipad. It looks both classical and modern. However, the basement of the castle is not as sunny as the castle looks on the surface. The basement has been transformed into a large laboratory. In addition to various electronic equipment, the most shocking thing is a row of caves embedded in the mountain wall. These caves are like prison cells. Iron fences are installed at the door. Looking through the iron fence, there are pairs of terrified eyes in the dark caves. The low howling of animals and the sobbing and begging of humans come out from the caves from time to time. Damn it, damn it, damn it. The owner of the castle, a little old man less than 1.6 meters tall, was furious. Dr. Yuri. Shut up, damn it. You brainless bitch. Did you burn your brain? Why did you bring people to me? Do you know that this may expose me? Dr. Yuri threw a beaker at Nicole's feet, and the beaker was smashed to pieces. Nicole frowned, took a step back, and said unhappily, Dr. Yuri, please watch your words. In the organization, our identities are equal. There are gains only when there are adventures. I brought samples that the organization urgently needs. Equal. Oh, damn it, if it weren't for you being someone's illegitimate child, just relying on your research institute that has been abandoned for decades and providing 30 samples to the organization every year, can you be equal to my research institute? No, my contribution is dozens of times greater than yours. Yuri was so angry that he almost jumped onto the experimental table and pointed at Nicole and cursed. The strong man Locke stood aside expressionlessly, and did not express any opinion on the dispute between the two. Nicole smiled coldly and said, Okay, doctor, there is no point in getting angry. I think we should talk about business now. I think my father will be very happy to see you share this laboratory with me. What? You want to share my research results? Dr. Yuri was obviously stunned. No, no, not to share, but to cooperate with me in my work, Nicole said with a smile. Dr. Yuri was furious. You are worthy of this bitch? What do you know besides seducing men? Oh, I almost forgot that you are also a doctor from MIT, but you have not obtained a diploma. So, you are unwilling to cooperate with me, Nicole shrugged. Leave the sample and go. Oh Locke, stay here. A group of interesting guests have come to the mountain. I may need your help. Yuri waved his hand impatiently. Interesting guests? What kind of guests can be considered interesting by the doctor? Their value must be higher than ordinary samples, Nicole asked curiously. A group of mutated bats were attacked, and only one escaped. However, the brain structure of that one seemed to have undergone a second genetic mutation during the attack. Oh damn, why am I telling you this? I did. You don't understand either. Get out of here, or I'll call the guards. Okay, if you insist. Nicole shrugged and snapped her fingers at Big Han Locke. Locke, you stay. Yeah, Big Han Locke responded in a naive voice, and then walked to Dr. Yuri. Okay bitch, you have nothing to do with me here. Get out of here. For the sake of the samples you brought, I will meet you next time the organization meets. Locke, what are you going to do? Dr. Yuri's sharp voice stopped suddenly. Locke pressed Yuri's little head with his big hands and clamped hard. Yuri's head suddenly exploded like a rotten watermelon. Hee, I didn't do a bad job. Locke wiped his blood-covered hands on his pants, raised his head and grinned at Nicole, showing a mouthful of rotten teeth. Brainless guy, can you please stop being so disgusting? Nicole rolled her eyes, kicked away the doctor's body in front of her, walked to the console, and clicked on the console with her hands flying. A few buttons. Locke stood behind her, scratching his head in annoyance, and said angrily, but I think headshots are very exciting. Nicole didn't pay attention to him at all, and said to herself, the mutated bat can have a second genetic mutation in a short period of time. Is this the mutation power that we have been looking for? Haha, we are really lucky. Let's take a look at the bat. Can you lead us to find these guests? Dividing line. Happy birthday to the students who have birthdays today. If you didn't get a red envelope in class, you have to blame the teacher and the school. Ha ha ha. Suddenly it occurred to me that yesterday was 1024. I wonder if there are any children whose birthday was yesterday. Send me the URL of 1024.